It's always nice to have a Chevron. We had a few Riley Daytona prototypes as well. One Maserati was due to be out there, but it's a combination of cars that go, from 1969 up to 2005. The R8 that is a big regular feature on SVRA, sadly not out there, although I did see it in the paddock. Look at this, here we go. To start our way, and they're almost 3 abreast as we go to the side, but the picture belies where they actually are. Look to your left-hand side, that's the man in pole position, leading the way, and the 29 of Benjamin Myers slotting in then to 2nd place there, and a good clean start as they go through the first corner, the Missions Foods turn 1, and up the hill towards the S's for the first time, Scott.
Yeah, and that's not a surprise to see that Sports 2000 car. Again, these are, again, in quotes, the slowest of the group, but most suited to these particular conditions of the 3 groups we have out there, and headed into the Big Machine Spiked Vodka Coolers bus stop for the first time.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting, but the bus stop, obviously a very tough part of this circuit. Every driver I've spoken to, as we're looking to change for the lead, Myers looking for a way past, coming into the approach to the bus stop, and I think he's going to make it, and he makes it with a plume, but now he's got to get the anchors out, and he's done it. That's a brave maneuver in these conditions. You can see the puddles, the sitting water, and that always scares me when I see that in any kind of car, and you know this in your road car. You really tiptoe across it, but when you've got so much power underneath you, and like I said, what belies these cars, they don't look necessarily like an Indy car or a fast car, but their power to weight ratio, because they're lightweight cars, the bodies on these and the way they're made, it's all about power to weight, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The Myers family was out there yesterday, both Benjamin and Andrew, in Sports 2000 cars. That was a class, again, we were saying, based on the Group 7 cars that were in Europe. It was very popular here in the United States as a SCCA class. It ran for 10 years. John Fergus won 7 of those championships in SCCA in the Carb Air S2000, and then his son Corey won the next year in Sports 2000. But it's now a regional class, but it was very popular back in the day. Again, these make 140 horsepower, about 140 miles per hour, and there were different iterations of the Sports 2000. Oh, we got a spin there.
Oh, sadly, 2 cars going out, and this was the fear, I think, in these conditions,
yes.
Because as you approach the first lap, fine if you can get it going, and you know as coming into here that it's going to be slippy. Look, we got the next one going off,
yes.
But everybody tiptoeing past the 2 cars stop. They're going to wait. Both of them are still under power, and I'm glad to say both of them have recovered.
Yeah.
But that's what can happen very quickly. As we look first time at the 62. And that is Mitchell Etel in the Chevron B31 from 1975.
Yeah, that is one of the higher horsepower cars out there, the Chevron of Mitchell Etel.
There's Andrew Myers in the 51. In a 1996 Carb Air Sports 2000. I'm delighted they've recovered. The 7 is John Blizzard in the. Well, actually, no. Let me just check that, because. No, that's a different number 7. I'm sorry, I've led you astray. That's Ralph Lamacchia in a Carb Sports 2000.
That's one of those cars we were just talking about, the Carb Air Sports 2000. It the first time out at Road Atlanta at the runoffs, again, these cars were raced in the SCCA. It finished 2nd in the hands of John Fergus, and he ran off those championships. They later had 2 Pro Series that John Fergus won the first time, the American Cities Racing League, and then they went to an Oldsmobile engine in these particular cars, which are usually powered by Fords. And the Oldsmobile Quad 4 was the engine in that last series before, sadly, they went to just a regional class.
Now, you mentioned the popularity. Was that because of the price point? I know that's a rude thing to talk about, but you know, when you get popular racing, it's usually because it's affordable, the parts are available, and you're not going into spending millions of dollars every time you go racing. So is that part of why it gained such popularity?
Yes, they were sports racers, and at the time, most of the sports racers, you had to have quite a large amount of money to not only invest in the car, but parts and transporters and what have you. These cars were, again, cost is a relative term in racing, but they were affordable, as you say, and we had large fields. Again, my dad and I did the runoffs for about 26 straight years when they were held at Road Atlanta, and these, it was not uncommon to see 40 or 50 car fields of Sports 2000s. Taiga was in as one of the Sports 2000 manufacturers. Lola in a number of forms, the T496, the T590. The Carbear CS2 was one of the manufacturers, and it was almost kind of Trans Am-like in that the manufacturers were very, very adamant about the cars being there and about them winning, and they were using the racing and their prowess as national champions or conference winners or division winners to sell those cars to clients. But yes, it was affordable. You're absolutely right about that. Much like, unfortunately, the Lola, the B2K10 was just a lighter version. The B240 was a lighter version of the B210. Again, more affordable and able to be raced, John.
And in terms of origins, most of those types of cars, and I'm thinking Lola and Riley, British-based?
Yes. And again, this formula was based on the European Group 7 Championship, which Chevron and I believe Lola were the two most prolific of the manufacturers over there. And they basically just took the concept, downsized it a little bit. You'll notice that these cars are two-seaters. That was in the rules. It had to have two seats. And some of these manufacturers took that to the extreme. It had a seat for the driver, and it had a little bitty narrow seat that maybe a baby could fit in. It was all about weight savings. As the class developed, you would see it went from cars that were not as aerodynamic to cars that were very sleek and very aerodynamic. I know Swift had one of the long tails, as they called it, for aerodynamics. And as you saw towards the later years, you begin to see over the wheels, I believe it was Swift that had the first one, half moon covers on the wheels, and then it developed on the Lola to completely covers over the wheels. Again, all about aerodynamics. You saw the, much like Formula Ford, the rear view mirrors that were way out on the side, all of a sudden they were aerodynamically inboard. You had developments in the engine, you had developments in the chassis. So yeah, it was affordable. It was a fun class to race, and as I say, very, very popular here in the United States.
Mitchell Etel making a move perhaps at the bus stop. He thinks better of it in the number 62, and he's going to make a pass very soon, I think, in that Chevron. And yeah, it's been a good little race. But if you're wondering, we welcome our viewers from around the world on our live feed of the speedtour.tv. And if you're wondering why this is more of a depleted field, mainly on safety grounds, I think these cars are, or a lot of them are, priceless, and of course they don't necessarily always trust themselves in these conditions, because these are probably the toughest conditions you could race in, because it's very greasy out there. It's early morning here at Watkins Glen. Not a lot of traffic out there so far, so these are the first guys to venture out, really. Yeah, you can see we've already had two spins at this particular corner, but it's Myers, Lamachia, Etel, Myers, and Nadell in 5th position.
Now, David Nadell, I believe that is the Lola that we were talking about. I'm sure that they will switch to him. Nadell has the highest horsepower, which, of course, in these conditions, it's not unusual to see him at the back of the pack. Normally, he would be far out in front of these cars that are out on track. But Nadell has that, what we call an affordable Lola that was out there. The B2K40 was the lighter version of the B2K10. It was more affordable. It was developed for the American Le Mans Series LMP 675 class, which Chris Dyson is very familiar with, having won that championship, and also for LMP2, which was a later kind of version of the American Le Mans Series.
Well, Myers in that leading number 51, having a beautiful day out, even though it's raining. He's got a 18-second lead over Lamachia at the moment in the number 7. And only 5 cars venturing out, and there is that second place 7. Now, he's got a battle on. Because he's got a couple of cars, including Etel in the 62, popping out the 29 of Myers, who's just lost that position. And in comes the number 7. Yeah, these are tough conditions, really tough. And you can see them, or hear them, feathering the throttle and just not putting it full beans just quite yet.
And as you say, that these drivers are usually do extremely well here in the Tri, but it is a real challenge on this wet circuit. Again, Watkins Glen International with a lot of history to it, but this course is a very fast course. It has uphill, elevation to it. It has off-camber turns. This track is one of those flowing type tracks, much like Road Atlanta, where you don't usually look at a track as one turn to another. This one, you kind of put all those turns together, and they all flow together to get a good lap time. But again, that elevation changes with this standing puddles, very, very challenging for these drivers. They'll cross them in these cars, and I'm sure, Ben always likes to see the hands. I'm sure you can see those hands going all over the place on these cars. Yeah,
Watkins, I was talking to a couple of the drivers about why they love Watkins so much, and It doesn't have one particular straight. It reminds me a little bit of Donington Park in terms of the challenge, which is high-speed, fast corners, but nothing that's flat out for very long. And so you're constantly working, and that's what drivers like. They constantly, especially when racing, you don't want to sit there kind of yawning down the big long straight. We do have the horseshoe, and that is perhaps the only, the boot as we call it, but perhaps the only place that they really open up. But the rest of the time, as you can see from this complex here, from right to left, you're constantly working, and you're just literally on the throttle and off the throttle.
Yeah, the Franklin Road Apparel Turn 11 down to Mission Foods Turn 1, that is about really the only place where I would say you could relax. But most of the time, you're right, these drivers are very busy. Again, they're shifting gears, they're hitting apexes, which again, in these conditions, you do not want to touch those curbs. Unless you're familiar with ice racing, you don't want to touch those curbs, because you will sail off into the grass. And as we learned at Lime Rock, where unfortunately we had a little bit of rain there, once you get on the grass, you don't slow down, you actually speed up. So you don't want to do that. But again, yeah, the straightaways here are not what I would call straightaways, and you don't have a chance really to open up that throttle, especially in these conditions.
Get some nice tight shots now as they come through the mist here at Watkins Glen. Our first race of the day coming up next is Group 10, and we're looking forward to that one. We've got a bunch of great NASCARs in that one. We saw them out in Yale. Hopefully Ben Sissel coming up to join us. We've also got Group 8 and 12. We've also got, of course, our big race of the day, which will be the TA, XGT, SGT, and GT. That race, local time 11:05 here in New York time, which is Eastern time in the North American time zones.
And that's going to be another horsepower handling type battle, because the 850 plus horsepower from Trans Am cars on a wet circuit. I know we have been very blessed not to have a lot of rain at the races that we have run this year, but the one that we did in Mid-Ohio is the one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
You could hear a wheel spin, and you could see those cars. They were sideways. They were all over the place. So very exciting Trans Am race coming up.
Well, yeah, and I'm also looking ahead to this next group. I mean, we've got some very powerful muscle cars coming up, and they're gonna have to be about their wits for sure.
No.
Myers then extending his lead. He's now taken it to 25 seconds, but I think just to get out there and be going around is good enough at the moment. Here comes the 62 of Edel.
Yeah, Myers was one of the few cars we actually saw pass somebody, and that was very early on. And I'm sure, one thing we're talking about, the wet track and the handling and the horsepower, but another one is you don't want to be behind a car. You get the spray right up into, especially with these open wheel cars, and the Sports 2000s are open cars. You get all that spray right onto your visor, and it's hard enough to see as it is. You don't need spray coming up right on you.
Here's the other Myers, number 51.
And again, you can see on that one, you see the wheel covers are completely covering the wheels. That's a little bit later version of the Sports 2000. And again, that was done for aerodynamics. And Swift actually started putting half-moon covers on their cars as a reaction to what they saw there. They say, wait a minute, that looks interesting. We need to do something here.
The main straight yet again then. 5 laps gone in our first race of the day. We have a plethora of historic racing to bring you over the weekend. We've also got a really special group, the Bugattis. We watched them last night, Scott, and I'm just really impressed. Cars that date back to the early 20s.
Yes, we had one from 1922, the Type 22 that Ettore Bugatti actually signed the engine on, 1913. Most of them were from the mid-30s. But I was absolutely amazed, and had been since I saw him on Thursday in the test sessions, of the engineering that goes into these beautiful Bugattis.
It does amaze me as a Brit, and I'm sure a lot of Brits.
I didn't know that. I couldn't tell.
Yeah, thank you. But no, it does amaze me that I can talk funny if I need to. But
that's what I'm used to.
But no, it does amaze me that obviously so much of historic racing does include these British marks that were at the time in the early days, and the French with Bugatti and the Italians and so on, the Germans, but how many of these cars have made it over to this side of the pond, and how much revere there is for. You only have to talk to Ben Sissel about his MGs. I mean, the Americans do love the European cars in the historics, and I'm just amazed at the amount in North America as we go around from West Coast to East Coast, just the amount of cars that there are that are originated from Britain.
Well, most of the manufacturers always looked at the North American market as one of their premier markets. Obviously they were making cars for their home country, whether it be, as you said, Britain or Japan or Germany or what have you. But it was always the U.S. market that had the most racing in it. And a lot of the cars, you'll see them say like there's 100 produced, but 2/3, maybe 3/4 of them were shipped to the U.S. A lot of the importers that they were shipped into, the distributors here in the U.S. were actually coming over from Europe as well, forming teams. Fred Opert, Carl Haas were all importing the Lolas, and the Doug Shireson Racing was importing Chevrons and what have you. But yeah, it was the manufacturers were looking at the U.S. market. The Datsun from Japan that Dr. Katayama was sent over here to fail, but actually he succeeded. And in fact, the Japanese head of Datsun came over and said, how are you selling all these cars? And he said, well, I understand the market. They have a lot of racing heritage. You can use these cars to sell. And Japan said, well done. He sent over here to fail, but he succeeded wildly.
Yeah, and I mean, that story is as good as any as we are on the final lap now, because the Japanese, the American muscle cars, the big cars, you'd never have thought that the Japanese would make a dent in the American market. But exactly that, the economies of scale, their efficiency, their ability to win on the track against the bigger cars, absolutely, race on Sunday, buy on Monday, and it was true for the Japanese, especially we'll see in Group 10 coming up, in Group 8 and 12 coming up, several of the Datsuns that made that voyage over and made it so popular. And of course, we all know about the 240 in America and how Paul Newman in many ways made that such a household name.
Yeah, the 240Z was actually the car that kind of broke the tradition or mold, as you will, of the so-called small econobox Japanese cars.
Yeah.
Because they were always they were importing them obviously before Dr. Katayama came over, but Katayama brought the first what I would call true sports car from Japan over here.
So, closing stages of our groups 5A, 7 and 11. We apologise for the fact that it's not that substantiated with the number of cars, but of course you've got to think of safety in these conditions, and these brave men that are out there at the moment, including, it looks like a Myers fest, because it's going to be Andrew Myers who's going to take the victory in the Kabir Sports 2000. And we're just listening to that beautiful sound of Eagle going up in the number 62 Chevron, and lovely sound indeed. The checkered flag is being prepared, and the 29 of Benjamin Myers will take second place, and Lamacha, who had been in second for much of the race, will take the podium in third place. Conditions not improving as the race went on. I was hoping for it, but I think, like I said, this looks like one of those rather dull Snetterton days, and I've had many of them. You know exactly what I'm talking about, Scott, having tuned in, I'm sure.
Yes.
But this is a typical British day in terms of, and it's a typical British, it's a typical New York State day too.
Yeah,
and the weather's starting to turn as we turn towards fall and winter.
Yeah, the forecast was for 75% rain, but it was 100% when I stepped out of the hotel this morning.
Yeah, exactly.
We were kind of hoping that maybe these cars, as we worked through the groups, would kind of maybe get some dry lines forming, but unfortunately it doesn't look like that's happening.
Not at the moment anyway. So, checker flag is being prepared for Myers, and there it is. And congratulations to Andrew Myers, who takes victory in the 1996 Kabir Sports 2000 in atrocious conditions, I may add. Well done. You can see the clear visor. He needs that for sure, and he had the best of runs because obviously he didn't have any spray to deal with in his face anyway. And he takes victory over the number 29 of Benjamin Myers in a similar car. And in third place, Lamacha in the number 7. Ralph Lamacha in the Kabir 2. So it's a complete Kabir 1, 2, 3.
All Sports 2000s, all Kabir's. John Fergus was a very smart man. He picked his cars very well. That Kabir, again, 8 national championships, 7 for him and 1 for his son. And the Myers family, very happy to be on the podium, first and second step.
Thanks, Scott. Well, we'll take a
John.
short break from Watkins Glen. More action coming up. Stay with us here on the Speed Tour.
The Mission Foods VIR Speed Tour returns to Virginia International Raceway October 6th through the 9th, featuring the Trans Am Series presented by Pirelli, the Sports Car Vintage Racing Association, International GT, Formula Regional Americas, F4 US Championship, Mazda Heritage Cup, and the Saturday Haggerty Cars and Caffeine Car Show. You do not want to miss the Mission Foods VIR Speed Tour. For tickets, simply go to virnow.com.